Bonsoir tout le monde. My name is Rebecca Duclos, and I'm the Dean here of the Faculty of Fine Arts at Concordia University. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that our university is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Garaway, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to the third in our annual Wild Talk series that was launched with Mark Dion, continued with Michael Rakowitz, and is now welcoming the inimitable Christine Jones. Before we get going, I'd like to say a few words about Professor Catherine Wilde, the former Dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts, after whom the series is named. In 2015, after 10 years of dedicated service, Catherine's guidance of the faculty and her commitment to this university was recognized by many admirers, colleagues, and friends. But it was one of them, in particular, Aaron Hogg, who birthed the idea of the Wild Talks and agreed to support it for some years to come. Erin has been a generous and loyal supporter of the Faculty of Fine Arts for many years, and her special support of the talks and of Catherine's legacy here has given the faculty an unprecedented opportunity to invite someone such as Christine to spend time with us, to speak to all of you, and to host a workshop with students in this very space tomorrow. So a special thanks to Erin Hogg and her family for sponsoring this lecture series, and to Catherine for her years of dedication to the faculty. And now I'd like to welcome Christine Jones back to Concordia after some decades away from her beloved theater department. But I'm not sure if we should treat all of our alumni this way. We're making Christine work very hard during her visit. She's been up since at least 6 a.m. this morning to take part in a Women in Leadership breakfast early this morning, is delivering her talk to you this evening, will be at the reception to meet many of you afterwards, and will then show up again tomorrow for a masterclass with the students. But Christine is no stranger to working hard. She's already spoken about the grit needed for life in the arts this morning. But she also spoke about passion and a sense of humor and the joy that comes from living a life collaborating with others. And so I can think of no better person to introduce her than someone else who is a woman of passion and of humor especially, her colleague and friend, Anna Capilouto, who is also the Associate Dean of Planning and Academic Facilities at the faculty, is a professor in our Department of Theater, and is an accomplished set designer herself. Thank you, and bonsoir.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can't hear myself. There's no monitor on stage. Okay, so welcome to the DB Clark, everyone. This is an introduction in 4 acts. Act 1, a personal story, and I've got some stage directions here, so keep it light, try not to read your notes. But that's almost impossible. There's a reason why we work backstage, right? We can't learn our lines. When I heard that Dean Duclos had invited Chris to deliver this year's Wild Talks, lecture, I was shocked. It's Christy from the block. I was surprised, and then I was very, very, very pleased. I remember, of course, when she won her first Tony, I was in a pub in Cape Town, South Africa, for the football. And of course, we all gravitate to the theatre pub, because we travel in packs as people. So I was in the theatre pub with all these theatre people, and they told me that Christine Jones had just won a Tony. Do you know her? And I thought, do they think New York City is a suburb of Montreal? Do you know her? And I went, yes, I do. I do. When that never happens, right? So I first met Christine when I was working in the prop shop here at Concordia University. I was a technician and she was a student. She walked into the prop shop and started talking. She has this amazing voice. To my ears, it's the best voice. It was, oh my God, it's like Nightingale's. Odd, right? But that's what I was attracted to. I liked her immediately, and we became fast friends. Around the same time, someone had asked me to do a set design for a one-act festival. It was called Quebec Drama Federation. Anyway, it's defunct now. The play, though, I remember, was called Hello Out There. And I said that I would only do it if Christine Jones would co-design with me. So we did. There was no budget. I mean, no budget. So she said yes. So we co-designed, as I said, and we won Best Set. $200 cash prize. Anyway, I couldn't go to the award ceremony. I was heavily pregnant and exhausted. Chris went to pick up the prize money alone. She came back to my place afterwards, dressed in a tutu and a blonde wig. And I think that pretty much sets the stage for the rest of her career. Act 2, career. Stage directions. Try not to read this list. Try not to. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child is a blockbuster in London's West End and Broadway in New York. On Broadway, Christine didn't just design the stage, she completely redid the lyric theatre. Its nickname, before Christine got hands on it, was the Barn. It don't look like a barn anymore. There was 33 million in renovations. She's created a completely magical experience that takes the audience by the hand, both inside and outside the theatre. She won both an Olivier and a Tony for her incredible craft and artistry on Harry Potter. In 2015, she directed, with Shayna Carroll of the Seven Fingers, sorry, I had to do that, the immersive theatre piece, Queen of the Night. It was opera, it was rock and roll, it was circus, it was sex, it was magic, and plenty of food and drink. And now it's closed, so nobody can get there anymore. It won a Drama Desk Award for Unique Theatrical Experience the same year. 2015 was hot for her. She also won an Obie for Sustained Excellence for Set Design in 2015. And Vulture, my personal favorite zine, put her innovative Theatre for One show in the top 10 theatre events of 2015. In 2013, she took Verdi to Las Vegas. That's an opera, in case you theatre folks didn't know. Her production of Rigoletto at the New York's Metropolitan Opera featured a 1960 Cadillac Coupe de Ville she bought on eBay. You can buy anything. And I remember the third act curtain going up, and the old doyens of opera inhaled breath all at the same time because there was a stripper on a pole, topless. It was fantastic. Okay, so the Cadillac, we'll go back to the Cadillac. They stuffed the soprano in the back, and Chris said at the time that the cars were bigger in those days. And of course, she won her first Tony in 2010 when the World Cup was happening for the incredible punk rock set of American Idiot, a rock opera featuring the music of Green Day. Act 3, process. Okay, for a designer, she writes a lot. Like, she's just writing all the time. So I'm going to leave her to explain how that process works, but she writes a lot. Act 4. Finale. Christine has said that being a designer is an ideal position because you get to be involved from the very beginning to the very last moment of the play in significant ways. And I agree. In theatre, we work as a company. We become a company. It's not just a company of actors. It's the set designer, the lighting designer, the video designer, the sound designer, the technicians, the stage management, production, staff, director. And hopefully, when you come into that room for the first time, you've worked with some of them before, and you know their quirks. Whether you know the company or not, you can be sure that room is full of egos. To work at the level Christine is working at is a testament to how well-loved she is in the theatre world. We fall in love with the people that we work with. and people fall in love with her because she's so, I'm starting to cry. Where are you? Because she's so incredibly generous in the room. And I've seen that when she teaches at NYU. She's loved and adored by her students. I see it in the classroom when I go down to teach with her. I make them cry, she doesn't. With that in mind, I am proud to introduce the wonderfully talented Christine Jones.
Oh my God.
Not a roast. Oh, the mic's on.
Great. Yeah, we'll just leave that there unless it's blocking anybody. Oh my God. Okay, first of all, how am I supposed to follow that? I mean, like if you could just do the rest of the talk, that would be great. Secondly, I always say to people that I really think it's such a shame that memorial services happen after you die. But I feel like I just had mine, so that's all good. So my wish came true. Okay, I have no idea. I'm supposed to talk for about 45 minutes. I have no idea how long this is going to be. And I've tried to make this talk for those of you that are here that I love dearly, who are my friends and family. Those of you who have no idea what a set designer is or who I am, hopefully there's something here for everybody. Thank you so much to everybody at Concordia and to Erin for bringing me here. I guess it's homecoming weekend here at Concordia, and it certainly feels like a homecoming for me. I do feel like I've died and my own funeral or something. It's crazy. So I'm going to go a little bit all over, but talk about the path and how I came to be right here, standing in front of you. Oh, and I have a clicker. Let's see. So let's see. Where do we begin? There we go. Okay, so I'm calling this talk Turning Points, Lucky Breaks, and the Hokey Pokey. And I think that will become clear as we go along. Okay, this is going to get really boring. There we go. Okay, so aha moments. For me, my first aha moment came when I was 10 years old, and I went to see a movie called The Turning Point with Shirley MacLaine, Anne Bancroft, and Mikhail Baryshnikov. And my mother might be able to attest that I came home from that movie bawling and sat on the dishwasher and said, "Mom, I have to be a dancer. I have to be a dancer." And I did study dance, and I was a student at Les Grands Ballets Canadiens. I was even in the Nutcracker, and was very passionate about dance for a long time. But eventually felt like that was just too much. That wasn't the only thing I wanted to be doing. And so I joined the drama club at school. So for those of you who went to high school with me, you may recognize this as the production of Merchant of the Venice. And I'm playing Jessica, and you'll see some of our friends in the picture as well, Wayne and Laura Schleifer. So I was in the drama club, and I was thinking I might be an actor, because most of the time when we think about theater, we think about being on stage, and that's pretty much all we know of when we think of theater. I graduated from BHS, and then I went to Marianopolis College. And at Marianopolis, I met Victor Garaway, who I had the pleasure of having lunch with today. And Victor was one of my second turning point moments. I was studying with him, and I graduated from Marianopolis and came to Concordia to go to school here, but felt lost, wasn't sure I knew what I was doing or what I wanted to do. So I went back to Marianopolis and was helping Victor teach his classes. And with him, I began painting backdrops and stage managing and doing all sorts of odd jobs. And one day he looked at me and he said, "Ms. Jones, I believe that you are a stenographer." And I said, "What, a stenographer?" And he said, "No, a scenographer." What is a scenographer? So the definition says, it's an artist who creates performance environments composed of sound, light, clothing, structure, and space. I describe it as designing for the stage is the process of taking emotional and intellectual responses to a text or a piece of music and shaping them into a tangible space for people to play in while other people watch. Okay, now I know what a scenographer is. How do I do that? And I looked in the Concordia guidebook at the time, and as it turns out, there was a program in set design in the undergraduate department. So I dropped all my English classes, and I transferred into the theater department. And I studied with Jean Gibbons, who's still here. I met Anna Capilouto, with Eric, who is here. And then one of my next turning moments was Jean Gibbons. I remember very clearly walking with him through the campus one day, and he said, "You should keep doing this, and you might want to think about going to graduate school in New York." So there was another lucky break here, and I remembered, I thought, okay, well, New York, how am I going to get to New York? That seems rather challenging. But for one, I had a marvelous boyfriend at the time, Thor, who's here tonight as well. Now I'm going to cry. Who was so encouraging and believed that I could do it and drove me to my interviews. And I also remembered that, oh, that's not right. Oh, sorry, I missed one. We'll come back to it in a moment. I remembered that I was a U.S. citizen and that I had the good fortune of having been born in the United States. And so I had a passport, and I knew that this was going to be a gateway into this journey. I want to step back for a moment because I'm forgetting this other big aha moment I had was seeing Le Dortoir, which was a theater production here in Montreal in what would have been maybe 1988, a company at the time called Carbone 14. And it was after that production, the lights went down, and I was bawling again. And I'd seen the way that these performers moved on stage, this physical, kinetic, adventurous, dangerous manner in which they were performing, and how they integrated themselves with the set. And I thought, I was crying, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So that was sort of my second big aha moment that happened right before I went to New York. So from here, passport. I pledge allegiance. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, there we go. Oh, and I head to New York City, and worked for 3 years in the graduate program there. Had wonderful teachers, and studied for 3 years there. Then I graduated from NYU, and another lucky break happened. I was at a design show, and somebody invited me to come and interview for a production that they were doing at a theater called Hartford Stage. And I went to the interview, and in the office of the woman who was interviewing me, there was a poem on the wall. And I noticed it. It was a poem that was written by a man named Joseph Chaikin, who was one of the great theater makers in New York in the 70s. He worked with Sam Shepard. He founded a theater company called the Open Theater. But he'd had a stroke, and he was aphakic. And this poem was him writing about what the experience of not being able to speak was like, and what it was like to communicate when you could only say yes. That was the only word he had for several months. So I read this poem, and as it turns out, I was going the next day to interview with Joe Chaikin for another job at the Public Theater. And I went to meet with him, and as I said, his ability to communicate was very limited, but I was able to say, you know, Joe, I read your poem, and I can't imagine what it's like. And I hope that we would find a way to be able to communicate. And the play we were doing was a play called Text for Nothing by Beckett. And it seemed like there was something so poignant about this man who had performed Beckett for many years, was now directing it, but without the ability to speak, as many of Beckett's characters struggle with themselves. So that production was called Text for Nothing, and it was starring Bill Irwin, who's a wonderful clown performer that some of you may have seen on TV. This is him, and that's at the Public Theater. So that was my first job out of school, and it set the stage for many wonderful opportunities. I've had the great fortune of working with many wonderful people over the years, including Julie Taymor, So I designed the green bird with Julie after she had done The Lion King. And everybody was very excited to have her working on productions that after she'd made this magical production of The Lion King. So we got the opportunity to do the green bird together, and here's some photos from that. This is this one character named Brighella. This is sort of his world, and he's a poet and a philosopher and an alchemist. And these are some other shots from the show. And then some years later, I worked on a play called The Occupant by Edward Albee. And sure enough, Anne Bancroft was starring in the role. And so I started to see how these circles begin to form. And having gone from seeing the film The Turning Point with Anne Bancroft, and now here I was some years later working on a production that she was in. And there she is. Some years after that, I designed a production called Burn This, which was another turning point moment. It was directed by a dear friend named Jim Houghton, who's no longer with us, and starring Ed Norton and Ty Burrell, Catherine Keener, and Dallas Roberts. Around the same time, I was working on a production. There we go, there's some shots from the show. I was working on a production of Debbie Does Dallas, and Dallas and I had started to date, and I would sit in rehearsal, and the actors would be speaking and be saying, Dallas, Dallas, I must get to Dallas. And I was like, okay, universe, I get the message, I'm listening, I hear. So I did Dallas. So Dallas is the father of my children, and I have two sons, Pilot and Ever, who are both quite a bit older now. They're now 11 and 14. But you'll notice in the bottom picture, Ever is dressed as Harry Potter. And this was many years before Harry Potter came to be a project. But when Ever was little, he wouldn't leave the house unless I drew glasses and a lightning bolt on his forehead. And we listened to all of the audiobooks together over many road trips. So that was my first introduction to Harry Potter. Through Dallas, I was able to meet Michael Mayer. Dallas is an actor, and he was working on a film, and Michael was directing it, and so he and I reconnected. He invited me to design a production called Spring Awakening, which is a musical by a writer named Duncan Sheik, wrote the music for it. We began in an off-Broadway theater in Chelsea in an old, abandoned, renovated church, and that eventually transferred to Broadway. And I'm going to use this project to talk a little bit about the process that I use. As Anna said, I do write a lot. A lot of my process involves rewriting the play. So I start at the beginning, and as I'm reading the play, I write out lines that speak to me in the moment. I use different colors. I use it as a way of, I talk about it as a form of ingestion. I'm trying to ingest the play into my body and soul and spirit so that I can work with it. So I'll go through and I'll write out many, many lines, and then I go through a process of distillation, and I try to pull from the writing some kind of poetic phrase that becomes a touchstone or a guiding principle throughout the rest of the process. So in this case, what it gets distilled to is, a shadow calling says a heaven comet's on its way to touch me with words of the body wounded and shoot me up with the junk of you. The shadow passed and a blue wind whistled through totally fucked ghosts. The heartache whispered, all is forgiven. The heart shall mend. All shall know the wonder of purple summer. We are visual artists, but I think that the more that we can approach our work as poets at every step of the process, then the more likely it is that the product that comes into being will have a poetic resonance. So I try to use words as carefully as I use images. But from there, I do a great deal of research. I pull images from many sources, books, magazines, the library, of course, and then I collage them into some kind of storyboard form. I think it's really important to make research work for you and to collaborate with the images. A lot of times we'll collect pictures and we'll leave them in a pile on the desk, or we'll put them up on the wall and leave it at that. But there's ways that you can engage with the images and make them talk to each other, and they will tell you more about what you're trying to find. So cutting them out, organizing them in some kind of order from beginning, middle to end is a way of divining what the design wants to be. I often think that the design already exists from the moment you start creating the production, and our job as both designer, director, creator is to work like a forensic scientist and follow the clues and find your way to what that production is wanting to be. So these are some of the collages from Spring Awakening. From there, I build a model. So this is a half-inch maquette made from cardboard and brass. It has all the figures. And from there, the process is about working with the director and the other designers to stage the show like one would in a dollhouse. We go through the play from beginning, middle to end and imagine how each scene might happen. We're talking about lights and costumes and props, from the very beginning, working as a team. And then from the model, drawings are created, the set gets built. Oh, go back one. There we go. And then the actors come and we put on a show. Spring Awakening, as I mentioned, I met Michael Mayer, who has become a longtime collaborator. I often refer to him as my other husband. And we've done many shows together, and one of them was American Idiot, which Anna mentioned. And American Idiot was with the music of Green Day. Was also significant for me because on that production I met a man named Stephen Hoggett, who's a choreographer. And one of the most amazing things that happened with Stephen was that at our first meeting, I was talking about this production that had been a seminal moment for me, Le Dortoir. And he said, "Oh my God, I never saw it because I grew up in Yorkshire, but I saw a video of that production, and it was seeing that show that made me want to become a choreographer and a physical theater maker." So we instantly hit it off and bonded on that point. The phrase that I distilled down to for this production was, "Vocalized electric pulse needs silence expressed. Learn to shout, learn to listen, learn to hear, and not to forget." This was one of the collages that I created as part of the process for American Idiot. And then often, in addition to a model, what I might do is take tracing paper and put it over the collage and then quickly sketch out with the director or on my own as I'm trying to solve the flow of the show and go through moment to moment and really imagine how actors are moving, how they're interacting with the set. What are the possible things that could happen? I think that a set ultimately doesn't necessarily solve all of the questions, but it provides the potential for many things to happen. So you're trying to build a space that has potential for discoveries to be made, for experimentation to happen, and for playfulness and spontaneity. This is my Le Dortoir moment. So there was a large piece of scaffolding that we flipped over on its side, and it spun around, and the actors jumped on top of it to create a bus. And I always felt like it took me about 20 years, simple stagecraft and complicated machinery that we can use and whenever possible, availing yourself of all of the tools, both the simple ones and the more sophisticated ones, is really exciting. Oh, this one. So Stephen Hoggett then introduced me to John Tiffany. And John and Stephen and I did a couple of productions together. One was Let the Right One In. Does anybody know the film Let the Right One In? Yeah. So this is a stage adaptation of the film. And one of the really exciting moments of this, it was a really difficult problem to solve because actually the whole last scene of the movie takes place in a swimming pool. And when John first called and asked if I would work on the production, I was so excited to be working on it because I love the film. But then there was this moment of like, oh no, but wait a minute. There's a whole scene at the end that takes place in a swimming pool. How are we going to do this? But Stephen and I got together and we were brainstorming, and we knew that the majority of the play would take place in this forest with this jungle gym on stage. And different pieces of furniture could be brought on and off to very simply evoke the different locations. And therefore, for the final scene, the jungle gym spun around, and on the back of it, there was a water tank that was hidden there that became revealed in that final moment so that the actor could get into the water and we could do the final scene with the actor in the pool. And it was a fun moment, and I was very happy with Stephen to be able to figure that out. Then we did a production called The Ambassador. A passion of mine is working on productions that have music that I love, working on Green Day, working on Spring Awakening, and here Gabriel Kahane is a wonderful artist, singer-songwriter. And this wasn't a show so much as a staged concert. And it was done at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, a space that I had always wanted to work on. It's the Harvey Theater. It's a thrust stage. And for this production, it was inspired by his album, which was all about LA. It was songs all about LA. And so what we did is we created the landscape of Los Angeles out of books and scripts and tapes and had the band placed within it. Stephen choreographed some lovely moments where the musicians could move throughout the space. In this case, the violinists are laying on their back to play the music. And we embedded lights into the set so that at a certain moment you could look down and it was if you were standing up in the Hollywood Hills looking across LA and you could see the lights of the highways intersecting around the different buildings. And then in the last moment, there were lights in the books, and they lit up to create this final landscape as he opened a book. And now we get to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. So John Tiffany, who I worked with to do the, then invited me to design Harry Potter, and I have to say I was completely speechless and knew that my kids would be very excited about it and recognized that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I moved with my family to London for 6 months and immersed myself in the project fully. As I was mentioning, I often go through a very deep process with the text, but sometimes what I do is I find a piece of text that is also, in some ways, feels like the essence of what we're doing. And when I began working on this, I was in London. I went to the museum library at the Tate, and I looked through every single book in the library. And near the end of the day, I found a magazine that had this wonderful article about train stations. And there was a quote in it by a man named Thomas Wolfe, who's an American writer. And the quote says, "Few buildings are vast enough to hold the sound of time. And now it seemed to him that there was a superb fitness in the fact that the one which held it better than all others should be a railroad station. For here, as nowhere else on earth, Men were brought together for a moment at the beginning or end of their innumerable journeys. Here one saw their greetings and farewells. Here, in a single instant, one got the entire picture of human destiny. Men came and went, they passed and vanished, and all were moving through moments of their lives to death. All made small tickings in the sound of time, but the voice of time remained aloof and unperturbed, a drowsy and eternal murmur below the immense and distant roof. And I read this quote, and I thought about King's Cross Station and what a perfect point of departure this would be for the play. So we had the idea that we would set the whole production within King's Cross Station. I began to do research. I did my collages as I normally do, and I found this photograph because when I started thinking about putting King's Cross Station on stage, immediately the problem becomes that the scale of a train station compared to the scale of a theater, they're not going to quite match up. And I felt that if I tried to do that, I would be forcing something that would feel inauthentic and false. So I started looking at spaces around train stations, and found this room that's the departure lounge of St. Pancras Station. It's actually a room that still exists. You can go there now, and it's called the Booking Lounge, and there's a bar there. And it seemed right away to have a lot of the atmosphere of a train station, but without the big window in the back wall that you would never be able to get rid of. And then I started going to all the different train stations in London, to Victoria Station, Paddington Station, St. Pancras, King's Cross, of course. And eventually we created our own space that was inspired by all of these different spaces. I began thumbnailing. There are, I think, 90 scenes in this play because it's actually 2 plays. The play begins where the books leave off, and it's 2 parts. It's 5 hours of theater. There's multiple spells, locations. It was a huge task. So I started just trying to make little diagrams so I could learn what the flow of the show was. So these make no sense to anybody but me. They look like hieroglyphics, but I know exactly what's going on in them. And you can see, I think, it's a way of, sometimes I think about this process like musical notation, and the way that a musician will write down music on a score. When I make these drawings, I'm trying to make the music and the rhythm of what the set design will ultimately become. Oh, I have a pointer. So let's see. So like, for example, right here, that I know that's when they turn time. And I use little initials for the different characters. I also call them football diagrams. So it's like a coach who's making football plays. I'm imagining how everybody's going to move. But I call it test driving because it's not the only way that people can move through the space, but it's one of the ways they can. And as long as I know I can get from the beginning to the end of the design and have at least come up with one solution for every moment, then I know that on some level the design is sound and it will support the play. From there, we did 3 workshops. We went into rehearsal rooms with a list of things that we had to figure out how to accomplish. How are we going to get from the platform 9 3/4 into the world of magic and the Hogwarts Express? How are we going to make a Patronus happen on stage? How are we going to make one character turn into another character? But we got into a room. We had string and fabric and cardboard and a magician. It's the only time I've had a magician as part of the collaborative team, and I never want to do another show without one. It was absolutely delightful. Then we sit down with the model, and as I said, like working with the dollhouse, we go through the show moment by moment, and we move the figures around, and we figure it out. In this case, I did build a white model, which I wouldn't normally do, but because I was doing some of it back and forth between New York and London, I needed to work quickly. I needed to work on something that I could carry back and forth in my suitcase, so I began in 1/4 inch. but then quickly we move into a color model. So we make all of the props, all of the furniture, so that when we are going through the show, we really can look at every moment as it might be. Then comes the day where I present the model to the cast, and we share with the cast what we're going to be attempting to do. And in this case, I think I mentioned I went to every rehearsal, I did the warm-ups with the actors, I immersed myself in the process as fully as I could. Here we are trying to work out a moment where they're on the roof of the Hogwarts Express, and we ended up using suitcases that rose into the air, and they were all red suitcases, and they became the image for the Hogwarts Express. I test things out. So, anything that I'm asking an actor to do, I want to make sure is safe and comfortable. So I'll often go through with the props people and in the shop and test things out. So here we're testing out I don't want to tell you, because if you see the show, then I've got to keep the secrets. As Anna mentioned, when we did the production in New York, we were given a rare opportunity to not only build the set on the stage, but to reconfigure the entire space, as well as the outside space. So the Lyric Theater was originally built in 1903, and then it was combined with the theater next to it, the Apollo Theater. And so there's actually this large expanse of wall space on the 43rd Street side. And the producer said, "Can you think of something to put on that wall?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." So we had the idea of building this large wing, which has become a public art sculpture that's on the side of the building. Inside the theater, you can see the set on stage. In addition, we created the archways, we added the boxes, we designed the wallpaper, the carpeting, the light fixtures, the details on the box. I was telling Thor earlier, I also gave every member of the team a time capsule and asked them to put something in the time capsule, and we embedded them within the foundation of the building as we were making it. I decided to make sconces that were phoenixes, in honor, of course, of the phoenixes of Harry Potter, but also in honor of the fact that this theater was rising again from the ashes. So we took details from the original building. You can see on the breast of the phoenix, there are two L's that mirror each other, and that is a detail that's on the facade of the Lyric building. So we were trying to bring in new elements, but also honor what the space had been for many years. Throughout the space, we also created sconces for each of the houses. It was something that was really unique about this project as well, and that I was, well, many people think, oh, well, how did you deal with the movies? And did you look at the movies as part of your process? And we knew from the outset that we actually wanted to create our own world. And contractually, we actually weren't allowed to use anything from the movies, but we really didn't want to either, because as theater makers, we had an opportunity to do something that is unique and to engage the audience's imagination. In film, you have CGI and special effects, but in theater, the special effect is the audience and their imagination. And the success of a design is as much about what you don't see as it is about what you do see. And in addition to that, we got to design our own logos for each of the houses, and so I designed a sconce for each of the houses along with it. Wallpaper that has Hogwarts emblems within it. Wands. I was able to design wands for each of the characters. I sat in rehearsal, and as I watched them work, I would design a wand, and then we had this whittler out in a field in London who we would come and say, Jim, can you whittle us another wand? And he was like, okay. He was like whittling and whittling and whittling. And eventually, as an opening night present, I drew a wand for each person that had worked on the production. And this is the assemblage of all the wands that we drew over the course of the work. Oh, and you can't see it; it's cut off by the slide. But at the bottom, it says "In lustre et lumine," And that was actually a phrase that we put into the front of the stage in brass letters, not for the audience to see, but for the actors. And Illustret Lumine means let the light shine. And that was in reference also to working on Let the Right One In with John and actually Jack Thorne wrote the adaptation of Let the Right One In and also wrote The Cursed Child. And this idea of letting the light in was something that we were carrying through with our work, so that the light's going from the stage and from the audience. I mean, I have to say that the thing that was the most notable and different about working on Harry Potter was the energy that the audience brought to the event. People coming to see this show who were beloved of the material, who came excited and just beside themselves to be there. There were moments in our first performances, people were cheering. It was more like being at the World Cup. and when you equalize, when the amount of effort and care going outwards is met by that amount of care and investment coming inwards, it really does create a space unlike anything I've experienced. So you finally get to opening night, and this is the curtain and the H for Hogwarts on the curtain. So the play begins, and Harry walks on stage. When you come into the theater, there are suitcases on the stage, and it's as if time had stopped. Because in effect it did. When the books ended, those characters stopped in time. And then here we are 19 years later, and time starts again, and the story continues. What was so unique was that this production, you know, they could have done a play version or a musical version of the books, but the great choice that they made was to have it be new stories. So it really was as if time were starting again. So the first thing that happens is that the actors come on stage and they pick up all the suitcases, and as they pick up the suitcases, the music begins, and here we go. And here's one of the train sequences I showed you in the rehearsal with the suitcases laid out and the actors were sitting around them. We had a turntable that gave a sense of movement. Here's what we called the wand dance, and here you can see the different house logos that we made. The Ministry for Magic, the talking picture frames, a scene that takes place in the lake, a scene that takes place in the forest. And for that moment, the arches came apart and created a completely new landscape. So everything happened in this theatrical way from the train station. We never left the train station. The train station could come apart in different ways. Parts of the wall could come off. The walls themselves could reconfigure, but you were always in the train station. And with the audience's imagination, we could go to all these different places. And then finally, we come back to the final scene, which is in a graveyard. The suitcases are there as they were at the very beginning of the show, 5 hours ago when you first walked into the theater. And this idea of time being cyclical. And here it is, they're at the graveyard, and we realize that we're right where we began at the very beginning. Michael Mayer, as I mentioned, is one of the other directors I've worked with a lot. And the great fortune about working with Michael is that he works on plays and operas and punk rock musicals. And so I've had the opportunity to follow him along on his adventures. And as Anna mentioned, we did Rigoletto at the Metropolitan Opera. And that was one case where the director came to me and said, okay, this is what we're doing. It's Las Vegas, 1961. It's the Rat Pack. And we have 3 months, go. So we had to design it very quickly, but I still went through the process that I normally go through, and I distilled the text down to this phrase: the reign of voluptuous delights, to disturb this fete is fatal. And that really is, in some ways, the essence of the story. There are these debaucherous men, the Duke's entourage, and it's like some kind of crazy rat pack party in Las Vegas, and Rigoletto dares to disturb this, and they make fun of him, they kidnap his daughter. His disturbance is fatal for both his daughter and ultimately himself. As Anna mentioned, collaging again. So here's the first act of Rigoletto. So it's set in Vegas in a casino. And I can tell you a funny story. I hadn't worked in opera very long. We were having to do it very quickly. And I was just trying to make this all work. And the idea was that in the two sides, these towers were actually elevators, and that was how people could come in and out of the space. And then the second scene is in the Duke's apartment, and we thought, oh, it could be like the penthouse apartment that the Duke is living in. That's perfect. But then I realized that, but there's a moment a few minutes in where the chorus enters. So 50 people need to get on stage, and the only way I've provided for them to get on stage is through these two elevators, and that's really not going to work. It's going to be like the clown car, or like the elevators are going to open, and 25 people are going to come out of each elevator. And it's like my first job at the Metropolitan Opera. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I was like, okay, think. I'm like, okay, well, they're having a party. They kidnapped the daughter. They've been up all night. Okay, new idea. All the chorus is on stage from the beginning of the act. They're all passed out around the room with like room service, French fries, and ketchup. And they were like, great, yes, okay, that works. So I was like, phew, okay. And as Anna mentioned, the last act, which takes place, it's supposed to be at a sort of bar somewhere on the outskirts of town. So we set it on some dingy strip club, and sure enough, there was a stripper, as Anna mentioned. And the neon that you see in the beginning in the casino, there's actually an electrical storm happening. So we imagined that electrical storm would be represented by this neon that in the first act was the signage, and now it's a scribble, and it's the light that represents the storm. And there was a car. Here we go. Yeah, there's the car on stage. And we did put the soprano in the trunk, because if you're in a bar on the outskirts of Vegas and you got to get rid of a body and throw it in the river, you're going to put it in the back of the car. What are you going to do? So we did put her in the trunk, and she was really cooperative. And actually, but the thing that was great about it, people were really nervous about it, but the other thing that's great about it is that the trunk of a car is actually an incredible acoustic shape for the soprano's voice. So she ended up being even more excited about it. These are models of photos of a model for La Traviata, which is opening in December. So you see there's lots of people on stage. So working on opera, you always have to make sure you make all of your model figures. I mean, they're still only, paper thin, so you're still lying to yourself on some level, but you do your best to try to make sure that you're accounting. Now I never forget. Now I'm like, how many people are coming on stage? When? I gotta make sure that I don't make that mistake again. And our idea for this production is that the whole thing takes place in her bedroom at the moment of her death. So it's as if she's having a kind of hallucination as she's dying, a kind of fever dream. And so the seasons pass and the characters enter and exit throughout, but we never leave her bedroom. So it snows, the spring comes, and at a certain moment there's a scene that takes place in the country, and we have all of the filigree on the walls comes off the walls to create a shell around her. So I also have a passion for immersive theater, and Shayna and I, as Anna was mentioning, went on a crazy ride. And we created a piece that was a theater, dining, circus, one-on-one, sexy encounter. It was a great, great privilege to work on the show. It really was madness. It was absolute madness. And it was in the basement of the Paramount Hotel, which is a hotel in New York that was a nightclub in the 50s, a very famous nightclub, and it had been pretty much dormant for many, many years. And we had the opportunity to go in to redesign the space and to create this production, which ended up running for 2 years. But it was so lovely. I got to meet Shana, and then I got to introduce Shana to Anna. And now Anna and Shana work together frequently. And it's just another example of how we meet people, and one person leads to another person, and friendships, and falling in love, and messiness, and it's all good. Here are some photos from that production. The butlers. I originally got brought onto that project because I have another project called Theater for One, and I'm obsessed with one-on-one encounters. And I actually went to interview the producer, Randy, about some other thing that he was doing. And then he started talking about this project. And then I was originally brought on to maybe create the one-on-one experiences would happen within this evening. But then one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I was one of the directors along with Shana, and we were off and running. But it was my passion about Theater for One that had led me into this immersive world. And Theater for One is a portable, private performing art space for one actor and one audience member. And as I was saying earlier, when you equalize the energy between the stage and the audience, it creates an incredible heightened atmosphere. And that is true of Theater for One. This quote, "A gift that has the power to change us awakens a part of the soul, but we cannot receive the gift until we can meet it as an equal." One of the reasons that I love Theater for One is because it equalizes the relationship between the actor and the audience member. And I had this idea, it kind of came in one of those crazy moments where an idea comes to you and you're not sure exactly where it came from, but it did. And so I worked with an architecture firm called Low Tech, and they had the idea of using road case technology to make this booth. So on the outside, it appears like a box that you might see moving sound equipment or music equipment, but then when you go inside, it's a plush red velvet Theater for One. I realized as I began working on it that there are precedents for these kinds of spaces, peep show booths, confessionals. So I scoured the city of New York, and I went to a bunch of the peep show booths, and I was asking people, like, who makes these? How do they happen? Where do I go? And they looked at me cross-eyed, and they eventually introduced me to Danny, who I have in my Rolodex as Danny, well, my Rolodex, my phone. He's Danny XXX in my phone. But Danny was the man who built all the peep shows, so I went to his shop in New Jersey, and then he donated a chair that we use in Theater for One that has great speakers in it, so you can get that surround sound for your video peep shows. But we use it in Theater for One. So the way it works is that the audience is led inside through the door here. And then the door is closed, and we pull the partition out that's between the actor and the audience member. Here we are in Times Square. And then there's a performer on the other side, and they might perform a song or a play. Production that I did many years ago that had Bill Irwin performing as Beckett in Text for Nothing comes around to Bill Irwin performing in Theater for One many years later. And if you could play the film, this is just a very short video about this piece.
to see a play on Broadway, you're there with 1,000 other people. It's a shared experience. This is you alone. The whole experience is just about you.
You have somebody sitting just an arm's length away from you and you feel like you're actually making a connection with the actor. It's just unlike anything I've seen before.
I could see you weren't expecting me.
You don't get that in most theatrical experiences. It's intensely intimate.
When you're seeing more traditional theater, you're a bit more anonymous. You can yawn, you can check your phone. But when it's just you and there's eye contact for the entire time, you suddenly feel like you're responsible for the quality of the performance.
Are you lost? Or are you just waiting here for something or someone?
If that had been in a theater, in a play, I don't think I would have necessarily had the same response, but because it was between the two of us, I think I was allowed to have an emotional response. The armor that I have to put on to go into the world was stripped away.
It felt special to have a performance that was just unique to you, that even if someone saw those same words being said by the same person, they were never going to see that same performance.
So, this is a little weird, I know. Well, at least it is for me.
I think what this does is it wakes us up. It makes me feel alive, right? It's live theater.
Oh, there's some other things I really wanted to talk to you about, but I'll talk to the next person.
If I feel like it's a story that's been told and it's just slightly different, that's not exciting. This is exciting. This is the theater I want to be seeing.
So I will finish by saying, oh, sorry. Well, okay, the last thing I was going to say is the hokey pokey. That's what it all comes down to. You know, people say, like, what's the key to your success? And it's the hokey pokey. You put your whole self in, you put your whole self out, you put your whole self in, and you turn it all about. That's what it's all about. So.